Okay, we are on page 15 of our. Yep. Don't worry. Don't worry. We're on page 15, and the lesson we're studying is Jacob and Esau. Last time we started this chapter, but we didn't actually make it to much of Jacob and Esau. We were talking about Abraham's death. You want a book? Anyone? So we're actually going to touch on the dynamics between Jacob and Esau in this class. The text we'll be looking at is Genesis chapter 25 and chapter 26. Genesis 25 and 26. So we'll be looking at that. And we will dive into these questions. Now, last month, we looked at the dynamics of Abraham passing away and both of his sons, Ishmael and Isaac, being a part of his burial process, as well as Abraham setting things in order before he died, specifically with basically the birthright, so to speak, the blessing, giving all that he had to Isaac, but divvying up things to his concubines' children, who after Sarah passed, he had other children as well. He took other wives after Sarah passed. That was where we left off last month. Esau and Jacob, their birth in chapter 25 is a very interesting one, because in verses 19 through 34, when it's giving the genealogy of Isaac, what was Rebekah's fertility state when they got married? Rebekah and Isaac, because Isaac was married to Rebekah when he was how old? 40 years old, right? And was Rebekah able to have kids when they got married or not able? So Isaac prayed to God that she would be able to have kids, and she did. And do you know anyone off the top how old was Isaac when they finally had kids? Nope, because he was 40 when they got married. So how old was he when Jacob and Esau was born? 60. So that was a long time for them. Isaac. That was a long time for them as a couple, but God blessed them not with one son, like Isaac was one son for Abraham and Sarah. He blessed them with what? Twins, right? Not just two, but actual twins, right? So when we think of Jacob and Esau, we don't think of them as twins at all, because twins usually have what type of relationship? Fighting, or are they usually good friends? They're usually good relationship, twins, right? But these two boys were not of a good relationship, to the point where Rebekah's entire pregnancy had problems, and she went to God and said, why am I this way? And the interesting thing is God answered her. Now, in the previous generation, God spoke to Abraham, angels appeared, and Sarah witnessed those things. But in this situation, God actually answered Rebekah. And what did he say? What was wrong with her? Two nations are in the womb, and the older shall serve the younger, right? So they're born. Esau comes out red and hairy. Jacob comes out smooth as a baby's bottom, right? And what is Jacob doing to Esau physically while they're born? What is the baby doing to the other baby? But specifically, Where's Jacob's hand on Esau's body? Verse 26. On Esau's heel, right? The brother came out and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, so his name was Jacob, right? That's important. Jacob means deceitful, right? So that's important as we go through this story, is that's how Jacob was born, with grabbing Esau's heel, right? So that brings us to page 15. Now, the importance of 23, verse 23 is it sets the tone of what is to come, right? Now, one thing we need to understand when we look at God's divine prophecy is, remember, God lives outside of time. Now, this is hard for us to conceptualize, but if you were able to be in tomorrow already, right, which is the 5th, and you were able to see all the events of everyone in church, what they would do today, but you're in tomorrow, when you're telling us, hey, this is what will happen, are you necessarily influencing those things, or are you reporting things that you know are already going to happen? There's a big difference, because people feel like, well, maybe when God is making prophecy to something, he's forcing people to do certain things, right? But not necessarily, right? Because God is saying there's going to be two nations arising from these two boys. The course of those actions that the family members took brought them to that, meaning God didn't come down and say, hey, you should deceive your father. Hey, you should be so hungry and sell your birthright. Those are things that they did. It's just that God already knows that they're going to do that. So when he makes the statement, that's the understanding. Some people look at it and say, oh, well, God made them fight because he told them before they were even born that there'll be two different nations warring inside of her, and that the younger would serve the older. Remember, it's like you seeing a movie and telling me who never seen the movie, right? The movie is made. Can you influence the movie when you tell me what's going to happen? No, you just saying this is what happened in the movie. When I watch the movie and experience it, now I'm on the same page with you. So there's a thin line between divine intervention and free will. Think of the life of Samson, right? Samson had free will to do whatever he want, but in the end, he still did what God asked him to do. That's the divine power of God. We can't fully understand that, right? People try to wrestle with it. They try to divide the scriptures to understand. You can't fully understand because nothing in your existence anywhere is outside of time. There's nothing I can even give you as a reference to be like, oh, this is what it would be like outside of time, except for a book or a movie or the next day, right? Saying, hey, if you were already in tomorrow and you told people about today, you would have already experienced today. But even that doesn't fully make sense to us. So just think about those things as you're hearing this as a mother. What would that mean for you years later? We're not talking about 2 minutes later or 5 days later. We're talking about hundreds of years later. How would that affect you? Okay. Question number 12. Explain the significance of the birthright, the right of the firstborn, Genesis 49:3. So let's turn to Genesis 49, which is ahead, but we'll just use this as a reference. Somebody read for us Genesis 49 verses 1 through 4. Genesis 49, 1 through 4.
Jacob called his sons and said, gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall in the last days. Gather together and hear your sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength. The excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. You went up to my couch.
Okay, good. Now, Reuben was what? The firstborn, right? So talking in terms of the blessing, it looks like that goes to the firstborn. So that's our starting point. Let's turn to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 21. in verse 17. What does that say? Someone read that for us. Deuteronomy 21, verse 17.
You must acknowledge the son of his unlawful wife as the firstborn by giving him a double share of all he has. That son is the first sign of his father's strength. The right of the firstborn belongs to him.
Okay, so these are instructions from God to Moses to the people and how they're supposed to conduct their family. So what are the instructions to fathers? What are the instructions here? Because this is under the law of marriage. He must give what to the firstborn? Double portion of what? All that he has, right? For he is the beginning of his strength, which is the same wording that Jacob gave to Reuben. Okay, let's turn to Second Chronicles, which is right after First and Second Kings. Second Chronicles chapter 21. Someone read for us verses 1 through 3. Second Chronicles 21, verses 1 through 3. So he gave the kingdom to Jehoram because why? He was a firstborn, and those are the instructions given during the law of marriage in Deuteronomy, right? Now, this is something that ancient civilization did, as well as modern day monarchs do, meaning in England, you have the royal family where that lineage is passed down from family to family. Typically from human history, we learn what? Does that work or not work? Meaning just because you have a last name, does that mean you should be the next in line to lead? No, right? When it got time to give a king and Saul was the king, who was the next king according to God? Jonathan or David? David. Was David Saul's son? No, right? The point is, just because your dad is CEO of something doesn't mean you're going to make a good CEO. Most of the time, you make a bad CEO because you feel privileged. But the point was, in the beginning, this is how it was set up. So this concept of birthright is vitally important. So when we go back to our 5 and we're looking at verses 27 through 34, right? What happened in this story between Jacob and Esau once they got older? Not to the point where they tricked Isaac yet. What happened between Jacob and Esau? Because there's two parts to this whole birthright blessing story. So what happened in verses 27 through 34 of Genesis chapter 25? And what's the significance of the birthright?
Well, so Jacob grabs onto Esau's.
Yeah, past that, when they're grown already. At this point, I'm asking if they're already grown. And something happens one day, Esau comes in.
So Esau's hungry, right? So Esau's hungry.
Okay.
And he says to Jacob, who already prepared a meal, give me give me food, because if you don't, I'm gonna die, and you can have my birthright. I think that's yeah. He's thinking I'm gonna die anyway. What's the big deal? So to me, that's like really extreme.
Okay.
And not really thinking, like living in the moment.
Okay.
Right? And not, I don't know if Esau thought that he would not, that Jacob would have his birthright. That would really be true.
Mm-hmm.
If he thought he was just saying it in the moment so he can get the food and then move on.
Okay.
And if you think about it and you look at the situation, it was, I want to say planned and designed, because that is the way it was going to end up being.
Okay. So let's go back a little bit though. Like, where did the discussion of birthright come from, though? Esau didn't initiate that. Who initiated that? Well, he said he was hungry, but who initiated the agreements of, nope, the mom's not involved. Jacob is in here. Jacob initiated the level of currency, right? So he has a product, supply and demand, right? This is a seller's market. Somebody comes and they want to buy something. He have no money. So nothing in life is free. So you want what I made because you're going to die, allegedly. You're so hungry. So he said, as currency, sell me your birthright. Esau's response is, I'm going to die. What good is a birthright to me? Verse 32. So then Jacob is smart and say, well, that's not an answer. So swear to me as of this day. So he swore and sold his birthright, right? So that was the backdrop for the story. So thank you. Now let's look at Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12 and verses 14 through 17. Hebrews 12, 14 through 17. What does that say? Okay, thanks. Now, with those verses in mind, right? Pursue peace with all men in holiness, right? Looking diligently, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up, causing trouble. And by this, many have become defiled, right? Meaning you have to have good relationships with people, because if you don't, and you start being upset with people, that being upset will turn to anger. That anger could turn to hatred. And what did Jesus say about hating your brother in your heart? What could that lead to? Jesus said, it's not, you've heard, do not this thing, but I'm saying, even if you hate in your heart, you've already committed this, one of the 10 commandments, which is what? Thou shalt not what? Kill, right? That hatred can progress and give birth into murder, right? So that's the instructions, which is why in church today, we make a big deal about relationships, meaning it's not good enough to just have a falling out with somebody and sit on the other side of the room or move to another state and go on with your life, right? Those are the instructions. Now, knowing the significance of the birthright, which was what again? What do you get as the oldest born in this culture? Double portion of all that the father has. So when he sells his birthright, he's really selling his inheritance, right? This would be like, in today's understanding, if you had a will and you said the whole company goes to child A, child B convinces child A to swap that. So when the will is read after the father dies, child A forgot about that. He's looking for the company. But in fact, the will has been modified and said what? Child B now gets the company. Child A gets nothing, right? So that's the concept of what this is talking about. Now, Esau, mom alluded to this, the type of person that Esau is, if he looked at this so callously, would be, it wasn't a big deal to him, right? This whole concept wasn't a big deal. Let's fast forward to the prodigal son. Was the father's inheritance a big deal for the prodigal son? No, because he wanted it now. Meaning what? Had he waited, who's to say that his inheritance wouldn't have been what? More, right? Because what if his father started being more blessed with his crops and it didn't matter to him, right? Just like you see a lot of these celebrity kids nowadays, that money doesn't matter the same to them as it matters to their family. Why? Because their parents used to be what? Poor. And when you don't have and then you have is way different than ever since you were born you have. That's why when you parent and you raise kids, you shouldn't parent like this. Oh, I'm going to give my kid everything I didn't have. Well, the problem with that is what? Your kid has no discernment between not having and having. People parent that way. People say, oh, what do you want for Christmas? Oh, a pony. And that parent will bend over backwards 2 times to try to get that child a pony because they said, oh, when I was a kid, I wanted a pony. Nobody got me a pony. Well, first of all, a pony not realistic. Y'all live in an apartment. So what are we going to do with the pony after the party? The point is that child is starting off at what? A level that things are owed to them. Somebody owe me that because I'm your kid and I asked for it, you got to give me that. But that person as an adult remember a time where they didn't even utter, can I have a pony? Because their parents let them know what? Nobody owe you nothing. We poor. You can't have. That's the difference, right? So when you don't have, right, Abraham, who started from nowhere, would have a different understanding between Jacob and Esau, right? Because Jacob and Esau, not only did their father have money, but their grandfather had money. So what do they know about not having money? I don't know, right? That's their nature. So he obviously didn't value this birthright, right? He didn't value the responsibility, because birthright also meant responsibility, the responsibility of him as the oldest to carry on his father's tradition. Now, also, let's not forget, how are these people in existence? How is Jacob, Esau, Isaac? Where did they come from? Think about what I'm asking, not physically. Where did they come from? Because if it wasn't for a chain of events, these three people wouldn't exist. These three people only exist on this earth because of what? Because of who? After Noah, who? Yep. But the relationship, not physically. Why do they exist? Physically, I know how they got here. I know the birds and the bees. I'm asking, how are they here? Why? Where did these people come from? Because of a conversation between what two beings? Abraham and God. And the promise was what? Abraham's descendants will be so great you can't even count them. But physically, how many descendants did he have? Abraham had how many descendants that was a part of the promise? One. So what was the responsibility of Esau? Not food, not money, but what? To carry on the birthright of what? His father and his grandfather, the promise made from God, meaning his point of view since a child should have been, I have to grow up, live a godly life, get married, and have offspring, and continue until whenever God's plan comes into existence. The problem with that is what? Everyone in this story lost concept of that, meaning it only took one generation before the people forgot all about the promise of why they even exist. Let's think of today. People exist. Blessings that kids have are from prayers that they did not even hear or utter, but yet they act as if what? Someone owes them something. Meaning this, there may be a situation where someone could have prayed, hey, I hope I have a wife, or we keep going to the doctors and we're not able to have children. And a prayer is uttered. Oh God, please help me to have a kid. I want to, have a spiritual family. I know you want godly offspring. That was the prayer. God said, I'm going to grant that prayer. And you give those children, right? The children come, and the children then live what way? Do they live according to that godly prayer? Like, remember, the parents prayed with the mindset of, I want to have kids so that we can produce godly offspring. Because the kids here now. So they're not thinking about how they got here. They're just thinking about, I'm here now. So Esau never took the responsibility of God's promise to heart. He didn't live a life that was worthy of why he even existed. Okay. Now, let's look at question number 14. Now we're in Genesis chapter 26. Genesis chapter 26. So the whole chapter 1 through 35 will be these next set of questions. So we'll get through these. 14. What three promises already given to Abraham were repeated to Isaac? Okay, don't go to Egypt. What else? Verse 4. What does verse 4 say? Do not go to Egypt is verse 2. Okay, he reiterate that your descendants will multiply as stars of the heaven. Okay. Yep, good. And then verse 5, he concludes those promises with what? What does verse 5 say? Say it again. Because what? Okay, so these things were going to come to pass because of the relationship that Abraham had with keeping God's commandments. Right now, keep that in your mind. Next question. What mistake made by Abraham is repeated by Isaac? We talked about this last month. Yeah, he lied that his wife was his sister, right? And then the people in that land, which were the Philistines, let them live there. And then one day the king looked and seen Isaac was caressing Rebecca's face and said, what? Hey, unless you people are more weird than us, that's not your sister. What if one of us would have had a desire to be with her? Then God would have brought down calamity on us. What did you do? Right. So that's a repetition of father to son. Okay. Question number 16. How does Isaac show himself to be a peacemaker? Now, after that incident with the Philistine goes away, Isaac stays. But what starts to happen to Isaac's finances while he's mingling with the Philistines? He begins to prosper too much for them. And they're saying, hey, you're taking up our resources, so you got to leave from here, right? So did he say, no, I'm staying, I'm going to fight? What did he do in a similar fashion to Abraham? Because there was a point where Abraham and Lot had a disagreement about finances and resources. So Isaac said what? He's going to leave, right? He went somewhere else, right? And he made a well. And he made that well, and the people the new place he went to said, what? That's our water. So what did he do? He just kept moving on. Yeah, he named that well and moved on. Here's the name. You keep the name. I'm gone. He built another well. Same thing happened. He went to the third well, and then nobody bothered him. And then his point was, now we know that God wants us to prosper here, right? So yes. Yep. And water came up from the well. So it was a clear sign. Exactly. So how are we to look at this in terms of how Christians are supposed to be peacemaker? There's two reference verses here, Matthew 5:9 and Romans 12:18. But what is the correlation or the lesson for us in terms of peacemaking? Mm-hmm.
And then also the scripture tells us that we should live peaceably among all men as much as life is.
Mm-hmm. So the instructions for us is we should be trying to maintain peace. So as a charge for the new year, this may be hard for us to understand. When someone offends you in church, you should be more concerned with maintaining peace than concerned with getting an apology. Some of us live like this. Couples, you know this is true. You're not going to forgive unless what happens? The other person got to say they're sorry. I'm not going to come out here and start giving forgiveness, because then if I keep forgiving, you're going to keep treating me that way. But is that maintaining peace? No, right? That's the whole point of Jesus saying turn the other cheek, because he wants what? To maintain peace, because what was his purpose? He said he was coming to what? What do we say during Christmas time? Peace on earth, right? Goodwill towards men. So the point is, as Christians, in volatile situations, our primary concern has to be to maintain the peace, right? Because we know better than others that things could get out of hand quickly. So Abraham did that with a lot. Actually, Abraham did that all throughout his life. Isaac did that with moving around, knowing what? Realizing that the promise wasn't yet. He knew he didn't have descendants, didn't count because he had two. So he knew the promise of that land couldn't have came to pass yet, so he moved on, waiting for God to give me. He didn't say, hey, God made a promise, so therefore, since we're here and somebody's telling me to leave, I'm going to take it now, because I don't have descendants that I can't count. I can count the descendants as two of them. So he knows the promise didn't come yet, so instead of waging war, he moved on and kept the peace. Now, question 17. What reassurance did God give to Isaac once he found that third well and the water came up? Because we need reassurances in life. Right? We can't just base off of promises that our parents interacted with. We need our own reassurances from God, which was what again? Yep. Mm-hmm. Good, right? So even Rebecca, right? The fact that she couldn't have kids, Isaac prayed she could have kids. She still interacted with God as well, right? God came to her and answered her question, meaning God is in the reaffirming business. He knows us better than we know ourselves. People need affirmation continually, right? Which is why we say, I love you 1,000 times, right? If not, you would just say once and be like, remember I told you 10 years ago. So that's enough, right? Kids and mothers don't operate that way. Oh, I told you I love you when you were born. You don't remember? I can't keep saying the same thing over and over again. You here, aren't you? Don't you got food? Don't you got a place to live? Oh, you're right. So that do mean you love me. No, no, no. That affirmation, psychologists talk about that, right? All the time, is reaffirming to that child. So God gives Isaac some affirmation that he, in fact, will be blessed, and he is a part of this promise, even though God already said that to his father. Now, question 18. How was Isaac's peaceable nature rewarded? What continued to happen to Isaac financially? Same thing with his dad, right? He started making more money and being prosperous. Now, let's talk about that for a second. Sometimes some people would say, well, what's the big deal? We only talk about goats and sheep. So how much money did he really have? But if you've ever had a farm, the fact that you have a male and a female animal guarantee healthy offspring. No, right? If you had chicken, what's something that the chicken could get and all the chickens will die from quickly, just in a matter of days? Bird flu. Can you stop that as a farmer? No. Matter of fact, once the chickens start getting bird flu, most of the farmers do what? They just kill all the birds, because what can you do, right? Let's say you had land and you have crops, and an insect called a locust comes and start eating the crop, and more locusts come. How are you going to stop the locusts? Can you? No. By the time I get enough people to try to stop, locusts ate all the crops. Once the crops are gone, what will happen? Will the seed just fall and grow again? No, because it took me lifetime to make that. Meaning, farmers all over the world, even today, understand this, that nothing is guaranteed in farming, right? You're going to be hard pressed to find a lot of atheist farmers, because no matter who they believe in, when crops don't grow and animals don't come out healthy, they praying to somebody, right? Please help, because my family's livelihood depends on it. So the fact that they were able to increase, remember, other people weren't increasing. The Philistines weren't increasing, right? So the fact that he was able to increase proved that God was blessing him. Okay, and then finally, question 19. How did Esau bring grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah? What does his marriage say about his attitude and character? Now, Esau married who? What was the lady's name? Who? Judith. Judith was her name, right? So God bless you if you named Judith, but today we got to talk about a Judith that wasn't in a good situation in terms of biblical lineage, right? So Isaac and Judith must have been on the same page, because the Bible says, what was their relationship to Esau and Judith weren't on the same page, because what was their relationship to Isaac and Rebekah? What does it say? What was their relationship? What did they cause Isaac? What did they bring forth to Isaac and Rebekah? Grief, right? So obviously these two were like Bonnie and Clyde for some reason, right? So they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. So the question is, what does his marriage say about his attitude and character? Now, we already understand his attitude towards the birthright, his father's physical possessions, and his grandfather's promise from God. We understand that it was callous and it wasn't a big deal to him, right? What does his marriage say about the attitude and character? Because somebody mentioned that the Judith was what? A Hittite. And how did Rebecca feel about Hittites? She wasn't fond of the Hittite, right? She basically was even praying later on that she prayed Jacob wouldn't marry a Hittite. So God bless you if you a Hittite. I don't know if there's any left, but apparently Rebecca wasn't fond of the Hittites, right? And he went and married a Hittite. And him and his wife caused grief to the family. So what does that say about his marriage and his attitude and character? Okay, he doesn't care. What else?
I think he totally went against what his father's instructions were for his brother. I don't know if that was out of jealousy or not, but he did not, he deliberately didn't marry one of Abraham's kinfolks. And I don't know if maybe he didn't want anything to do with them because of the promise that was given to Jacob. And so he made the decision, well, you know what, you asked Jacob not to marry someone else and to find a wife within the kinship. And so I'm going to do the total opposite because after all, you did bless him. And he now has my birthright, so I'm going to do something totally different. And he goes off and marries the Hittite, which causes, again, grief for the family.
Okay. And what else? What does it say about how he looked at his relationship with his family? People are like this today. This shouldn't confuse us because some people here, let me explain it. When you have Thanksgiving dinner and you have teenage daughter, right? And she get a boyfriend. She's saying what? Oh, I'm not coming to Thanksgiving. I'm going over here. What does that attitude say to the family? You just met this boy 2 months, 1 semester, and you already don't want to eat with your family you knew for 14, 15 years. What does that say about how she views her family? Be honest. His mother's in here. How would you feel? What would that say? No matter what her mouth said, what would her actions say about how she viewed your family? Oh, I don't care about your family, right? I'm out here trying to do me. I'm thinking about my own family, right? I'm already chasing after this new person, not saying, hey, let me go to both, not saying, let me bring him. I'm not coming. So I'll see y'all the next day, Black Friday. But on Thanksgiving, I'm going over here. The point was what? He wasn't concerned about his family's progress with this promise. Esau was concerned about who? Esau. He was more concerned about what he wanted to be about, right? His grandfather had instructions of how his father should marry and bring forth children, which was what? From his own lineage. He sent a servant all the way back to get Rebekah. Esau don't care about that. Esau wants to do things according to what Esau wants to do, right? And it gives us a backdrop of who he was as a person, how he looked at his family. How he looked at his family is what is going to lead us to the deception about the blessing, because the birthright and the blessing is 2 different instances, right? He sold the birthright for some soup to Jacob, but Jacob and Rebekah tricked Isaac into blessing Jacob instead of Esau, which was the formalized blessing, which we read in Genesis 49:3 and also 2nd Chronicles, and then the instructions of marriage from Deuteronomy 21. So all that to say, who you are is who you are. Like, we feel sometimes that things or circumstances come upon us randomly and it's not fair. It's not that it's not fair. It's that you are more susceptible to things that you are interacting with. Meaning, if you're a rude person, somehow, some way, you're going to usually find conflict. Why? Not that things are seeking you out. Is that what? You draw and attract that. Right? Esau had no responsibility nor any wherewithal to care about his family. So it's no wonder to me that these things happen to him. He's going to look at it and say, God's fault, because God prophesied to my mother that the older will serve to younger. But is that God making Esau be that way, or just telling his mother how he was going to be? Telling him how he was going to be, right? God didn't make Esau that way. Esau had chance after chance after chance to not be that way. But even in the decisions of who he was going to marry shows us the type of person that Esau was. For us, when we're looking at these things in our lives, we have to be more concerned with those sort of things, like, what type of person am I? That these things are happening to me, right? That this life that I'm living is happening to me. What type of person am I? So that's the basis of where we are. Okay, so next week we will conclude hopefully with this chapter, and we'll get more into the trickery between Jacob and his mother Rebekah in stealing the birthright. So thank you for everyone's comments. Just